Well, good evening and welcome to Lead Now. I'm Jim Pingle, Associate Professor of Education and Secondary Ed Department Chair here at Concordia University, Wisconsin. And on behalf of our entire university, we want to welcome you all here tonight to this very special evening. We're appreciative and glad to have among us administrators who partner with us as Concordia Promise dual credit high schools. We're also thrilled to welcome over 190 Lutheran administrators who are here, a part of the Lutheran Education Association National Administrators Conference. And it's also a privilege to see so many of our Lutheran public and Christian educators here with us tonight. And if you're tuning in online, we welcome you too. Tonight, we focus on the intersection of innovation and leadership, on what leadership looks like, particularly in the context of 21st century learning and education, but even more significantly, on why great leadership at every level is an essential element to building truly excellent schools. Schools where kids not only learn, but they thrive and excel. And of course, most importantly, where our students come to recognize their very unique purpose of children of the Heavenly Father and of saints of their Savior, Jesus Christ. Tonight is a TED Talk style event, meaning we've gathered a few of Concordia's greatest minds, greatest thinkers, and they're going to dive in and tackle this whole topic of leadership with us. In this slate of speakers, they each bring to us ideas that are not just worth going home and talking about and sharing with people, but hopefully instilling in your own leadership capacities and with your own faculty and students. Our hope tonight is that you leave here, that you take this as a gift, that you're inspired, encouraged, and equipped to go back to your schools, your congregations, your community, and make a difference. So our first idea tonight, the entrepreneurial leader. And so please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dan Sem.
So thanks everybody for coming out tonight. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about, the entrepreneurial leader. And I think a lot about what does it mean to be an entrepreneurial leader? What does it mean to be an entrepreneur? And I'll share with you some of my thoughts on that based on my own personal life experiences, starting a company years ago, and then now I'm a little bit older, so I look back on what other people do, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what I think entrepreneurship is through the eyes of iconic entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs and Thomas Edison. And I've constructed a rather contrived and cumbersome acronym for this, B-FLAT, which stands for having a bold vision that you want to pursue, and then wanting to execute that vision, because you don't have anything with just an idea. You have to execute the idea. And it's a little scary to implement a new idea that's going to be innovative, and there's risk associated with that. So you have to be a little bit fearless as well. And you're going to make mistakes along the way. You can't fear mistakes. You have to learn from your mistakes and ask for help along the way, because most entrepreneurs are in unknown territory, and you have to navigate that with help. And then finally, it's going to be hard work, and you have to be passionate to be able to make it through all the hard work you have to go through. So it's a little contrived. It's a nod maybe to the musical talent in my family that escaped me, but it's better than the previous acronym before I had the L in there. So thanks. I'm a little self-conscious about my weight anyways. So I want to share with you my life experience as an entrepreneur and what got me passionate about being an entrepreneur. And it started, I'm a Wisconsinite, grew up in Milwaukee, but spent about 10 years in San Diego in a place called La Jolla, which is right next to San Diego, beautiful area. I remember when I interviewed for the job out there, I called it La Jolla. I should have taken that Spanish class, but I still got the job. And I worked in a biotech company there for a number of years, 2 years, and then left with my boss to start a company, Tried Therapeutics, And that was a really exciting experience. San Diego is a real entrepreneurial community, and I love that environment. It energized me. It's where I learned how to be an entrepreneur. And Triad was eventually somewhat successful. We were ranked one of the top 10 biotech companies in the US by Drug Discovery Today in 2001, and we were ultimately acquired by Novartis. But there were lots of ups and downs, and I'll share some of that with you because those are the life lessons where I learned what I think it means to be an entrepreneur. So,
when you grow up,
but not that yet. So it starts with having a bold vision. And I come from the Midwest. I'm humble. We pride ourselves in being humble, if that's sort of an oxymoron, I guess. But had a bold idea. This was right around the time when the human genome was being sequenced. And I was trained as a scientist, and I was working in biotech, and my friends and I, colleagues and I, thought of an idea that would lead to this company. And the idea was born where many great ideas are born, which is in a German beer garden. And so we decided we wanted to break out on our own and start a company. Start Triad is what we did eventually. And that was a very exciting adventure. We dreamed big, so that's my first point. Don't be afraid to dream big. We decided that we would, amongst ourselves, come up with ideas, and then we would vote as to which idea to pursue. And to my surprise, again, as a humble Midwesterner, they chose my idea. But in all frankness, I was the only one that actually showed up with a 20-page written plan. So I guess a lesson there is when life gives you opportunities, seize it. You know, I had a sense that this was a special opportunity, and I came prepared. So we did decide to pursue the big idea, which was a way to pursue drug discovery that made use of the new genomic information that was coming out of sequencing the human genome. So that was exciting. I remember my theme song on the radio was Eric Clapton's "If I Could Change the World." It was inspiring me to move on. It was a really special moment in my life. But ideas without execution are really nothing, unfortunately. You have to execute ideas, and it's scary to execute ideas. And you need to have a little bit of courage to do that. So if you could go back to the previous slide, sorry. And so it was frightening for me. Initially, we approached the CEO of the company. Can we form this spin-out company? He said no. And one thing about entrepreneurs is they don't understand their word no. And so we talked to a number of lawyers, actually, at some point to figure out how could we go and start this company on our own. And we decided that we were going to do this. And in fact, one of the things that the lawyers told us was you have to quit your job to do this cleanly. So that was frightening for me. I had a wife and a child on the way, and I just got my first good-paying job after college, and I was going to throw it all away. So that was scary, and I thought about, well, the Eric Clapton song. I thought about what life was all about, and I thought about an experience that I had when I was younger, when I was about 20, when I was faced with my own mortality. So I had somewhat of a near-death experience, and I remember it vividly still now. I won't go into the details, but after that happened, I felt so different about life. I felt that every day is a precious gift, and you have to cherish it, and you have to do something special with each day. And other people that have experienced their own mortality in that sort of way have said the same thing, and Steve Jobs talks about it as well. So I decided to take the leap and overcome my fear, and I think fear is something that gets in the way of us pursuing our big ideas. So hopefully you don't have to experience a near-death experience to do that. But I think it is important to always realize that each day is a gift from God, and you should cherish it and use it. So in the B-flat acronym, the LEARN, which kept me away from the B-fat acronym, is that you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to always be learning as you move along with an entrepreneurial venture, because you're venturing into unknown territory. And you're going to make mistakes, and you can't be afraid of mistakes. I think we're taught to be afraid of mistakes. And we were presenting to venture capitalists from across the country. Maybe we would be planning for 2 weeks for a trip to New York to pitch to venture capitalists. We'd have our half hour, and they would shoot us down. And that kind of thing would happen over and over again. And I think we constantly changed our business plan and we adjusted, and you just can't feel bad about mistakes. So that's another lesson. And when you're doing a new innovative venture, you're treading in unknown territory, and you're going to have to solve problems on the fly. You're going to have to deal with situations that are completely foreign to you. So I had to figure out how to prepare a website, how to do business cards, how to present to investors, how to form the company, corporate governance. They told me I was the secretary. I thought, am I in charge of office supplies now? Which I was also. So you learn by talking to people and asking questions. So now looking through the eyes of some iconic entrepreneurs, like Thomas Edison and Steve Jobs, something really resonated with me. It's a video clip from Steve Jobs about how once you make a decision in life that you're going to pursue your dream and your passion and overcome that fear, you're really a changed person. And I have to say that when I decided to do that, to pursue my dream, I viewed the world in a completely different way ever since then. And it was sort of a special moment. And actually, when I originally heard this clip, it actually brought tears to my eyes because I could relate to what he was saying. So.
When you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world, try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. That's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it. You can influence it. You can build your own things that other people can use. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again.
So it sounds so simple, but for me it was life-changing to realize that I didn't have to be a passive bystander to life, that I could actually affect things and change things. And I don't know how we instill that in the classroom, but we have to somehow, because it makes you a different kind of person. It makes you more engaged and involved in living your life and having an impact in the world, and you shouldn't feel intimidated by the fact, can I really have an impact on the world? I'm only one person. So, there's a change in the mindset. But it's more than just ideas. Ideas are kind of useless on their own. They're nice, they're academic exercises, but you have to execute them. And honestly, I think executing is a lot harder than actually coming up with ideas. There are a lot of armchair world leaders and football players, but you have to actually go out there and do it, and that's, in my mind, the harder part. And I love this quote from Thomas Edison: "Vision without execution is hallucination." So you have to make your idea happen. So, all right, so if we could, next. So this idea that you should pursue a big, bold idea that could have an impact in the world, or even in a small part of the world. I want to think of myself as a humble, God-fearing person with strong values, and at the same time, I'm sort of torn. This idea of thinking big and bold, is it in conflict with the desire to think big and have an impact? And I have to say that I don't think it is. I think it's sort of a false dichotomy, and I do think there's a small cultural difference, and I've lived in Wisconsin most of my life, but San Diego for 10 years, and I love them both. Probably I love Wisconsin more, but I think one thing we do sometimes, and we associate it with the virtue of humility, is we hold ourselves back from pursuing big ideas, and we shouldn't do that. So I remember my boss, who I liked a lot, he was a role model for me. He said, "Dan, you Midwesterners, you're the salt of the earth." And I thought, what does that mean? I think that's a compliment. And it was. He was a nice guy, and he liked me a lot. We had a good relationship. But in my mind, it means that you're simple, and you do what's essential and what the world really needs, and maybe is more important than other things that are more hyped and pizzazz and that sort of thing. And that's good. Those are virtues in a way, I think. But at the same time, I think we get confused, and we think that it means we can't think big and bold and pursue big ideas. And I think that's wrong, and we shouldn't hold ourselves back from that, or we shouldn't let our students hold themselves back. So start small and think big. And I think there's a precedent for this kind of thinking in some people that we can view as role models. I mean, most iconically is Christ himself, who changed the world one person at a time and changed the thinking of the world. And certainly Mother Teresa, perfected in Christ, but Mother Teresa, a role model in that regard, who also said, if you can't feed 100 people, feed just one. So if it seems overwhelming to you to have an impact in the world, start small, but think big. And obviously, she's a model of humility as well. So fear. And I talked about overcoming fear. I think we all have fears. Fears, like fear of spiders and fear of heights, are easy to understand. We know what they are. If they're debilitating, we see a therapist and they help us through it. But I think there's another kind of fear that's more insidious, and it's a fear of living your life. It's a fear of living. And Mark Twain captured in a way that resonates for me, and in a little bit I'll have a clip from Steve Jobs as well. But I think we're afraid that if we take risks, something bad is going to happen. But I think the bigger risk is that we don't live our lives. The quote, the saddest words of all are, "It might have been." And so when I made that switch over in San Diego to take this jump, I never had regrets after that. And I think you have to sort of overcome the fears. And for me personally, it was rooted in the recognition of my own mortality. I believe in eternal life. I don't think Steve Jobs is a person who does, but his words have a certain wisdom that I think resonate for those of us that do. I think the message is that you have to live each day as if it's a precious gift. But still, it's good to hear what Steve Jobs has to say on this topic.
For the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart.
So the message there for me is we have to learn to treat each day like it's important and we need to do important things. And maybe that's not going to happen every day, of course. Even Steve said too many days in a row. But we have to live our lives with more of a sense of urgency. And the switch for me was when I encountered my own mortality, and I switched from thinking I have 50, 60 years to do everything to thinking I could be dead tomorrow. And I'm not really worried about that so much. I'm just happy each day I wake up and I have another day. So it's a switch in the way you think about things. And when you look at it that way, the little things you're worried about, like I'm nervous about speaking to all of you. That's something to be afraid of. I was afraid of quitting my job to pursue my dream. These things are actually pretty small in the big picture, if you can give it some perspective. And then from a religious perspective, because Steve Jobs is not coming from that perspective, even though he has words of wisdom for us, is I think God wants us to treat each day as if it's special and to build upon the gifts he's given us. If you look in Matthew 25 at the parable of the talents, God has given us talents, and he doesn't want us to hoard them away and be safe with them. It's okay to take a little risk. I don't know if this is an appropriate interpretation, but maybe God is looking for a return on his investment. We don't earn our way into heaven with what we do. Of course, it's based on faith. But still, I think God wants us to use our talents to have an impact in the world and not be afraid. The other thing, and it's related to fear, is a fear of mistakes. And I think in school we learn that it's bad to make mistakes. D's and F's are a source of shame. We are embarrassed when we have them. I always tried to get good grades. But I think in the real world, what matters most is that you know how to deal with mistakes, that you can learn from mistakes. That's what Thomas Edison said. He made lots of mistakes and failures, and he used them to learn. I think this idea that we're afraid of mistakes is dangerous. And to be an entrepreneur, you can't be afraid of mistakes. When I worked in a company, the thing that gets you fired is hiding your mistakes or repeating them because you don't learn. It's normal to make mistakes. So, and the other thing, and it's also, I think, a little bit related to fear, is to ask for help. You know, we think we need to act like we know what we're doing. I think this is a reason why PhDs and professors don't make good entrepreneurs, is they have to maintain this aura that they know so much and are afraid to ask the dumb question. I try to never be afraid to ask the dumb question, and I learn a lot that way. So, and Steve Jobs talked about asking for help. When he was a high school student, he called Bill Hewitt and asked him how to make a frequency generator, and Bill taught him how to do that. And Steve said he's never had anybody that said that he wouldn't help him. So ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Okay, so, and finally, it's hard. You're going to have to work hard to be an entrepreneur and a person that has an impact in the world. And you can only do that if you have a strong passion. And that passion has to be rooted in something deep that motivates you so that you can work hard and you can persevere through all the ups and downs that are going to be inevitably coming your way. So, now, you can't be passionate, in my opinion, about just making money. That's why I think entrepreneurs are most successful when they're passionate about wanting to have an impact in the world and change the world, and making money is something that goes along with that. This is something that I think is controversial in our current political state. And at some level, if it were to be these two folks going up against each other, I think it might be corporate America on trial. And I think that corporate America has had some pretty bad failings in the early 2000s with people like Bernie Madoff, who was pretty much purely evil in terms of affecting people's lives by stealing their money. He was pure greed. But even, you know, who was it? Jeff Skilling from Enron, who I think is still in jail. It was taking people's pensions from. That's pure greed. So that kind of corporate America is bad. But I think, you know, what business is about is something more than this, and what an entrepreneur, a good entrepreneur is something more than making money. It's about wanting to have an impact in the world. So, and capitalism, when done properly, is that way. So my background is in the pharmaceutical industry, drug development initially. And the pharmaceutical industry is also viewed very unfavorably these days. But if you look back in time to G.W. Merck, who was an icon in the industry, he said, medicine's for people. Think of people first. And if you do that, then profits will follow. That's the kind of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial leader we want, is somebody that cares about people and having an impact in the world, and then you can make profits so that you can make your impact sustainable. And I think Bill Gates is trying to have the same sort of impact as well. So this kind of entrepreneur, the kind of entrepreneurial leader I think you would be, is a social entrepreneur, somebody who cares first about having a positive impact in the world, and then only secondly about making profit. But I am the dean of the business school, by the way, so I don't want to say profit is not important. You need to have a way to sustain what you're doing and have an impact. That's why I think the dual bottom line is important. The other thing, I've known a lot of entrepreneurs in my life. They're kind of crusty people sometimes. They go against the grain. So don't be afraid to go against the grain and change things, because that's how change happens in the world. And I love this quote from George Bernard Shaw as well. So be a servant leader. You know, another iconic servant leader, another role model is Mahatma Gandhi. So be the change that you want to see in the world as an entrepreneurial leader. So don't be afraid to have a bold idea, pursue a big idea, even though we're humble Midwesterners with good, solid Christian values. Pursue your big idea, execute it, try not to be afraid, realize that each day of your life is a gift from God, and use it to have a positive impact in the world. And don't be afraid of making mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and don't be afraid to ask for help, because you're going to need it to do what you need to do, and be passionate about what you do, because without passion, you're not going to be able to ride all the ups and downs that you need to go through and do the hard work you need to make your dream of having an impact in the world become a reality. So, thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. As we're setting up here for our next idea, I'm just kind of curious in the crowd here if you want to indulge me a little bit by show of hands. How many of you are administrators in elementary schools? Raise your hand. Great. How about secondary schools? Okay, wonderful. How many of you are admissions counselors? All right, wonderful. I was just trying to think of the different categories. How about those of you that serve in district or national leadership within the Lutheran Church? All right, terrific. Oh, wonderful. How many of you are from the Milwaukee area? Okay, great. Thank you. What a bunch of great, wonderful Christian leaders and educators. We're thrilled to have you here with us. Well, are we ready for our next idea? Okay, we have the art and style of emerging leadership. Would you please welcome Gretchen Jameson?
Well, good evening. It is great to be with you. The art and style of emerging leadership. So what's this topic supposed to be about? Me? Or you? Both, maybe? I mean, the art and style of emerging leadership. Let's be honest. How many of us in the room, we hear that title and we think, this is a talk for the younger leaders in the room, maybe the greener leaders in the room, right? I mean, this is a room full of administrators, so the art and style of emerging leadership, I mean, that kind of sounds a little bit elementary, perhaps, maybe. I mean, I think all of us are self-aware enough to realize that just because an individual gets the title of leader doesn't always mean they've earned the position. And even if we are a really great traditional leader, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're ready to roll as what thinker Jim Collins would call a level 5 leader, sort of the gold standard of leadership. Not just transformational, not just inspirational, not just competent, a great team leader, a superior manager, just an all-around great traditional leader, but a level 5. Collins outlines these mythical beasts in his countless articles and books, right? He talks about the fact that that type of leadership is the single most essential ingredient in taking any organization, including in the nonprofit sector, from good to great. These leaders have a rare combination of humility and will, like Dan was just talking about. Humility and will, ferocious drive. They're deeply conscious and self-aware. They have a tendency to give credit to others and take blame on themselves. They're more plow horse than show pony. And they're not deceived by what the mirror reflects back at them. In fact, we might say in Lutheran terms that they're comfortable coming to grips with the old Adam inside. The personified triumph of humility and ferocious will. Well, even if there are no level 5s in the room, and I would guess we have a few in here, most of us on a daily basis are gifted with the opportunity of walking alongside faculty and students, and most importantly, those students, who are each at their own place on their own journey toward leadership or followership. We get to do that every day. And so the art and style of emerging leadership, I mean, it's a topic that's all about us and perhaps not about us at all as we strive to serve in teaching ministries throughout the church and in our communities. So, like most of you in this room, I sit in a leader chair. But which one is it? Right? I mean, which chair is the leader chair? Collins actually suggests that it would really trivialize level 5 leadership to try to quantify it in some sort of 10-point checklist that you just kind of mark off as you go along, and aha, you've reached it. You're a transcendental, inspirational level 5. And he's probably right. But I would suggest that there are certain experiences, certain shared habits of mind and perspective that those of us on our leadership journey can think about together and learn from together. So in the 4th grade, I was this really awkward kid. We had moved to St. Charles, Missouri from this tiny town in the thumb of Michigan, where I had been in a class that had 3 grades in a classroom, to a school where I had 45 kids in the 2nd grade. So 2nd and 3rd grade was really spent kind of learning the lay of the land, right? Sort of figuring it out. And you notice in my school pictures back then, I actually stopped smiling. I was happy. I was a well-adjusted kid, but it was a lot. 4th grade comes along, and I remember going to meet my teacher. My parents were Lutheran teachers, so I got that sneak peek of school ahead of time, right? Where, you got your kids. They get to wander around. They get to help do bulletin boards and all that kind of stuff, too, but they also get, like, the back seat view of the school. And I got to meet Mrs. Rhonda Georges. Maybe you know her. Mrs. Georges remains among the best teachers in my life. I actually remember the day that she taught me how to spell this really tricky word that kept tripping me up. The word was special. And Mrs. Georges made her kids feel special. She gave each of us the invitation to do a devotion for the class. And I remember working so hard on my devotion. I actually used a liturgical setting out of what was then the New Blue Hymnal. So I kind of overshot the assignment. And I remember in the moment being aware, actually, that I'd overshot the assignment, that it was running kind of long, and I felt kind of stupid for a minute, and like, gosh, have I done too much? And I wanted so much for my classmates to enjoy it, and I started to get nervous because I was feeling self-conscious. And then I see Mrs. Georges in the back, and she's smiling at me the whole time. The lesson from the student side, self-awareness doesn't have to be self-consciousness, it can become confidence over time. That's the emerging lesson. The lesson from the educator side is that you can never stop actively cultivating the leaders who are right now following you. Because the more you progress as a leader, don't you realize that leadership is actually more about who is actually following you than where you're so dead set on taking people? A 4th grade. So then I end up in high school, Lutheran High School, St. Charles County. My parents taught there. And so I was definitely a teacher's kid, like my whole life, right? They just kept following me. And I think they're watching online right now. So between my junior and senior year, I had the opportunity to attend Missouri Girls State. We say it Missouri Girls State in Missouri. Missouri Girls State, right? And I get to go to Missouri Girls State, and it's this great week where you learn about democracy, and some of us get really geeked out about that. And I got to be a senator, and we passed seatbelt legislation. It was fabulous. And I came back, and my senior year government teacher, Mr. Gordon Brado, who some of you may know, said, I'm going to give you a half of a class period, and Gretchen, your job is to teach us about the process of active participation in democracy, what you learned, but I want you to teach us about it. And again, like 4th grade, I worked my tail off. Worked so hard because as a teacher's kid, I actually actively understood what a gift it was for that educator to hand over part of his class. So the lesson from the student side, actively take advantage of the opportunities you're given to lean in. And the lesson from the educator side, emerging leaders hand over the reins with frightening levels of confidence in the abilities of those sitting in the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 25th chair in their ability to step up. I want to say that part again. The lesson from the student side was that emerging leaders take advantage of invitations to lean in. There are a lot of women leaders in this particular room. Elementary education gives us that in the Lutheran Church. We find more women leaders often, but not always. And I know we've got some young women here tonight who are students here at Concordia who are getting ready to go out and start their journey. This really matters for you. That you take advantage of invitations you're given to lean in, and that you say yes to it. And male and female older leaders, your job is to keep giving over the reins with frightening levels of confidence in their ability to do a great job. So there's this saying that you got to fake it till you make it. So, fall 1997, 8 a.m., standing in front of a class of 29 sophomores at Milwaukee Lutheran High School, teaching world cultures, and realizing, there's Wayne Jensen, he was my department chair. See, I still recognize your laugh, Wayne. And realizing in that moment that all those eyes are on you, right? And I really do believe that emerging young leaders, gosh, we've got to believe we've got the world by the tail. Because if we knew maybe kind of the whole truth of it, we might be terrified and never take risk. You got to just go for it. And I remember this moment with those kids, and there was this hiccup of the mind, this voice in my head. It sounded a lot like my dad. And it said, here you go. Here we go. And Lutheran ministry began. The lesson in that moment, I was both student and teacher, crossing over that line, right? And you realize in that moment that you've got to just plow through with workmanlike diligence, more plow horse than show pony. I'm sure the lesson on the student side was, sweet, first-year teacher. This is going to be easy, right? So you get to a chair like this. This one's really dusty, so I'm kind of afraid to turn it around. Maybe that's symbolic. You get to a chair like this and you've made it, right? You have made it. I worked at Corporate Synod. I know some of those folks are in the room, and they can probably attest to the truth of what I'm about to share, that the levels of leadership were actually defined by the numbers of ceiling tiles above your cubicle. No lie. And whether or not you had a wall. Walls are really big deals in the corporate world. Walls are big deals. But you sit in this chair long enough and you realize, if you have any shred of self-awareness or humility, that the success of the enterprise absolutely cannot be about your charisma. Why? Because eventually you're going to leave. And the goal really is that the organization actually does better when you leave. The misguided mix-up of celebrity and leadership plagues our culture. The misguided mix-up of celebrity and leadership is a toxic pill, and it needs to be avoided at all costs. The lesson in leadership? Emerging leaders let go of celebrity of self and pursue only the celebrity of the mission. The celebrity of the mission. So I made it to this chair, right? You're done. But my journey went on. This is my favorite chair. This is my pure PR chair. For me, my leadership journey let me know that I needed to progress a little bit more. I needed that next step. See, Collins actually says this is level 4 leadership. This is where most of us hang, right? He would say that this is good leadership here. This is competence. You're a good team leader. You've got good abilities. You're usually a decent manager. You're a good, traditional, solid leader. But it's this next step, this idea that you need to take risk, what Dan was talking about, this idea that you've got to follow with great abandon. Collins calls it your hedgehog concept. We call it your calling, that you've got to be willing to risk and go to that next part of the journey. So it was finally when I sat in this is a really comfortable chair, but I finally sat in this chair, and I'd left, healthcare. I didn't have any health plan, and I had a young child, almost 2-year-old, and you kind of, what did I just do? And that for the first time ever, I really did. I was like, I made it. This is what I'm really supposed to be doing. So how did I end up at Concordia exactly? Here's what I think. I think that you start to realize what my journey has taught me, what maybe your journey is teaching you, is that Collins is actually right. There is no 10-point checklist to phenomenal, world-changing leadership. But for me, I actually think that the journey is in and of itself the answer. If we're on a quest to develop always better and better into the unique leader that God has designed us to be, level 3, level 5, level 20, level 25, we never get to say this side of heaven, oh, I made it. I made it. the personification of humility and fierce will, means that every leader understands, every great leader at whatever level understands that he or she is always emerging. And we don't assume that emerging leadership is a stage to be left for the younger or the greener leader. Emerging leadership is not a stage, it's a state of being. It's a state of being. You know, I did leave this last chair, the I made it chair, and maybe stupidly started over, right? Still a leader, but in a whole new context. What higher education? I mean, it's a whole new context, all new colleagues, a network that's largely unformed here in Milwaukee. What are you thinking? But it's here that I've come to truly understand, and you've got these stories too, that the leadership development of the Christian leader is never complete. There's that saying, I never stopped trying to become qualified for the job. I never stopped trying to become qualified for the job. But for those of us in Christian leadership, we recognize that that's not actually about us. It's about our role first as followers. Great leadership is about followership. Great leadership is about always embracing the fact that really, in so many ways, we never make it because of the child that we are in the presence of our Heavenly Father. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gretchen. That was wonderful. It's no secret that leaders need followers. John Maxwell once said, if you're out in front and you look around and no one's behind you, you're just on a nice walk. But Gretchen's talk did allude to the importance and the concept of followership. And our next speaker is going to dive deep into this whole idea. Leaders need followers. Would you please welcome Michael Uden?
'Cause I hear a voice and he calls me every day. Would never say I'll never be enough. And greater is the one living inside of me than he who is living in the world.
It is an honor and privilege to have this opportunity to share some ideas with you, but I have to admit, feeling a bit out of my league. When first presented with this concept and my fellow all-star lineup, I had a strong "who, me?" reaction. I'm not sure if that admission makes me a phenomenal leader, but I think it confirms my humanity, and hopefully you may be able to relate to some of those mortal moments in your own life and leadership as well. As a middle-level manager, positioned here in the middle of your evening, I would generally be more comfortable with some sort of comic relief-wielding court jester, a little soft shoe perhaps, like an overture, curtain lights, this is it, you'll hit the heights. Yet, Bugs Bunny is not the one after whom I'm patterning my life. The song from Mercy Me, which ushered me in, says it all. Greater is the one living inside of me than he who is living in the world. For that reason, any good I have accomplished or any success I have had in my work as a school leader is directly attributable to him who knew me before time began. The Alpha and Omega, the one true God, the Outlook email and calendar with a pile of stuff on my desk, and I am literally the guy in the middle. I've been blessed with the opportunity to serve in middle management at Concordia, and every day is a blessing to advance the School of Education's mission. The topic given me was leaders need followers, and I've been reflecting on several weeks on how to synthesize how I attempt to lead my team when not channeling my inner Bugs Bunny, that is. In summary, I would recommend, in fact, to sweat the small stuff. That is not to say that every issue should stress oneself into a full lather and crisis. Quite the contrary. By focusing on consistent patterns of behavior and committing to deepening and genuine relationships, all small things in and of themselves, big stuff will seem less intense and will fall into place. Before I had opportunity to lead a team at Concordia, I was leading and learning from a home team. Here is my crew, including 5 children and a couple of delightful son-in-law types. My work, both here and there, is really all about the small stuff, the itty-bitty stuff. And that is the focus that I would like to share with you tonight. Integrity is apparently not a hard and fast criterion for becoming a presidential candidate, so why would it make the cut here? After all, if integrity is not a given in the highest office in the land, then why should it be a concern in your office? And does putting it as a priority make you a bit nervous, putting yourself on that kind of podium? The definitional components of integrity include honesty, moral uprightness, sincerity, and adherence to a code of values. When people trust and have certainty about the integrity of a leader, they're often more willing to face less certainty in new strategic directives or initiatives. And for any organization in the 21st century, particularly an educational enterprise, that ability to be nimble and responsive is critical. When we're driven by and subservient to our mission and our calling as people and as an organization, it provides us a filter through which the myriad of minutia, all of the small stuff which comprise our big days, can be considered. Leading with integrity can be very tough in a humanistic culture which seems to embrace every individual's variation of truth and seems to pounce on anyone who subscribes to a God-ordained moral code which is bigger than oneself. And here is where integrity as a leader needs to include transparency. When I mess up or come up short or disappoint or offend, and I will, on my own as well as in people's perceptions, I need to confess my sin and seek forgiveness. A leader of integrity is not above reproach, but she is a redeemed sinner who needs to remember both of those components, law and gospel, and live those out in direct and open ways. A popular quote about integrity is to do the right thing even when no one is watching. Yet as a Christian, I recognize that God is mindful of all I do, think, and say. For that reason, for me as a leader, a better t-shirt credo, and my fashion choice tonight was not nearly as chic and captivating as my friend Gretchen, comes from Colossians 3:23, which says, "Whatever you do, do it wholeheartedly, as though you were working for your real master and not merely for humans." A second itty-bitty component of being a leader whom people choose to follow is reliability. It is walking the talk of integrity and leading by example. I think the best pop culture exemplar I can share of reliability is Michael Vale. You may know him better as the Dunkin' Donuts character who dutifully rose each day as it was time to make the donuts. This is a small thing by the world's standards, simply showing up. It does not require a terminal degree or training in the Franklin Planner system. I could credit my father, a minister, as being a living example of this in my formative years. We set up tables and chairs for the church potluck. We made the coffee and plated the donuts for the Sunday morning coffee hour. Do you think my donuts may be representing too great of a theme in my talk this evening? We speak what we know. An integral part of leadership is to lead by example and to illustrate how every task of an organization should be vital. The impact of each individual is always secondary, but contributes directly to the integrity and the reliability of the whole, like a skillfully crafted watch or a well-oiled machine. Humility is another itty-bitty quality which effective leaders possess. Certainly, there are times when leaders need to be the face of the organization, exude confidence, and advance the strategic direction. Yet a leader who leads exclusively in the frame of positional power is singularly a figurehead and actually an organizational relic. I might add a sidebar of hilarity to humility, as I think it is essential that a leader never lose the ability to laugh, especially at oneself. Still, there is much more to consider for humility as a leader. Servant leadership, an official term first coined by Robert Greenleaf in 1970 and first modeled by Jesus Christ, seeks to put the needs of others first and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. Any leader must reflect upon the why behind their leadership. Which of your core values put you in that spot? This is an itty-bitty question with pretty large consequences. For example, the ancient world valued virtues such as courage and great wisdom, but humility was not esteemed. In fact, Plutarch once wrote an essay that would be widely popular if released as a self-help book today. Its title, How to Praise Yourself Inoffensively. Jesus, in perfect humility and contrast, did small things to make a big difference in the lives of others as well as in the course of human history. Servant things, feet washing, caring things, engaging in water cooler conversation with an adulteress from a cultural group far distant from his own, whose presence alone at the well signaled she was also alone in life. Intentional things, publicly highlighting and then dining with the tax collector who was up a tree, literally. And then, as the design example of servant leadership, Jesus humbled himself to death on the tree of Calvary. John Dixon, historian, writes, "It is unlikely that any of us would aspire to this virtue if not for the historical impact of the crucifixion. Our culture remains cruciform long after it stopped being Christian. Christ calls us leaders to lives of humility." Modality is a term with which you may not be as familiar, but I contend it is an itty-bitty consideration which revolutionizes how a team can operate. As an educator, I learned about the modes of learning, experiential, visual, auditory, and so on. When I first became a parent, my wife and I also enjoyed Gary Chapman's book on the 5 love languages of children, and we worked to determine which love languages were dominant in our own kids. A resource I would strongly recommend for school leaders is The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace by Gary Chapman and Paul White. The languages, gifts, time, words of affirmation, physical touch, and service have great utility in the workplace. First, it is vital for me to remember as a leader that my natural tendency is to engage with others in the ways I most enjoy engaging. For me personally, that is through words of affirmation and acts of service. An intentional leader, though, must also exert an itty-bitty effort to provide team members with what they most need and enjoy. For some, it may be the gift of time, of simply listening to the needs and concerns of others without the default male and/or leader desire to fix the problem. How else might this look in practice? I will confess that I love old school mail. That is, receiving a card or a letter in which the sender has handwritten a word of thanks or appreciation. Even in the digital world of FaceTime and texting and e-cards, that old school relic makes a different kind of impact. For that reason, I write and send old school birthday cards to every full-time faculty and staff member on my team. This year, that is 55 people. It is an itty-bitty investment of about 4 hours annually, but it offers a powerful and intangible return on that investment. Another suggestion I would offer, especially for those of you in a Christian organization, is to stop telling people you will pray for them. Instead, stop whatever you're doing right then and there and pray with them. Amidst the hustle and bustle of a busy day, you may not have the most ideal words and phrases, but the Holy Spirit's doing all the heavy lifting anyway. Intentionally be Christ's hands and feet in a world which needs it more than ever. This is humility personified. Another itty-bitty area for consideration is community. There are lots of ways in which this small and admittedly overused concept can be made real in your organization. First is the Matthew 18 guideline for conflict resolution. In a healthy organizational community, conflict needs to be addressed at the micro level, at the source, before it festers and becomes a cancer. This needs to be done directly, gently, and privately. Handling it any other way puts your organization or culture adrift and pulls it away from God's ideal and sends a challenging and contradictory message about forgiveness, grace, and restoration. As Matthew 18 also dictates, eventual resolution may later involve other stakeholders and actions, but do start small. Maslow reminded us what Christ demonstrated in his earthly ministry. The needs of the whole person must be met in order for him to feel fully engaged. As a leader, my team will not be willing or able to connect strategically and productively if there are spiritual, emotional, or relational gaps. Here I might start humming, "Chief of sinners though I be," as I have sinned and fallen short in recognizing and addressing this full set of needs among my team members, but little efforts can make a big difference here as well. For example, twice a year, my school team comes together for a retreat. My friend and colleague Gretchen hates the use of that word retreat because organizationally, and I guess militarily, that gives a connotation of settling backwards and resting on one's laurels. I see it differently. A retreat, as evidenced by Christ's examples of going away from the fray of his day-to-day and devoting time to be quiet with his heavenly Father in rest, reflection, and most of all, prayer, is a vital ingredient in building community. At each retreat, we make this a strategic priority. Without question, we use this time to chew on big issues and needs and strategic directions, but we spend as much time sharing God's word, engaging in team games and relationship building, breaking bread, and breaking routine. There are often small gifts given to everyone present, remember the idea of modality, and we rest and reflect in order to emerge from the retreat as a stronger Christian community. This work does not and should not be limited to once or twice a year, though. Every fall, I invite each of the 8 ministry teams in the School of Education to engage in a non-work-related study or devotional series. A past example is the Daniel Plan by Rick Warren. To celebrate and honor the individual achievements of our team members, I send out thank you notes, which sometimes include a free lunch pass for our dining hall. Much like those 5 extra credit points you used to earn on your 6th grade spelling test, it is amazing the impact of such small actions on the heart and mind of your community team. The last itty-bitty thing I want to share is magnanimity. I realize magnanimity is not likely a part of your daily lexicon, and I could offer a totally separate talk about my OCD-like penchant for words and for finding an ITY word which communicated this idea, but I digress. I wanted to include magnanimity because it captured some key constructs for impactful leadership. Higher things, bigger things, generosity and forgiving, pettiness, selflessness, holding a missional focus, committed to something far bigger than ourselves. An itty-bitty mind shift, which actually makes all of the big issues you face in your work quite small and manageable once put into the proper perspective. It is powerful and poignant to be part of an organization committed to something infinitely bigger than the here and now. We are connecting eternal souls to Christ. Of course, there's always going to be obstacles and challenges in that work because we labor in a sinful world. But maintaining an eternal perspective in a temporal world is a small, conscious choice which brings a peace that passes all understanding. It starts small. I pray with visitors to campus who come to learn more about the School of Education. If a student wants to graduate but still has to complete X, Y, and Z, I remind him that Concordia is a grace place, and we bear down and try to see what's possible. Our very mission statement, the School of Education, equips and inspires Christian servant leaders to pursue integrity and excellence, is the lens through which we consider every program, every strategic endeavor, every day. In fact, it is our secret sauce, our market advantage in a world in desperate need of a Savior. I am a redeemed sinner. I am a middle-level manager, and I am out of my league to be on the stage amidst this group of presenters. I simply do itty-bitty things to lead and encourage the team with whom I serve, and any success or greatness from my efforts is due to the one living inside of me. Matthew 17, verse 20 reminds us that itty-bitty things, mustard seed-sized faith, for example, can move mountains. Go ye therefore and do likewise.
Keep fighting the good fight. Keep letting your light shine. 'Cause I'm never
Michael is my boss, and I can tell you he does all those little itty-bitty things very well and every day. I'm very thankful, Michael. So we hear this term all the time, let's think or lead from out of the box. We hear it so much that it's almost become a pejorative term or concept. It's almost in the box, that phrase, out of the box, so much. But I guarantee you our next speaker, he will shatter the mundane for you. He is world-renowned. Many of you already follow him. And I think he's going to give us a new way, or have us put on new eyes of truly thinking and leading and being out of the box. So let's get ready to be innovative with our next idea. Let's welcome Bernard Bull.
Okay, so there's an irony. I was told that when I came up on the stage, I had to stand within this box that's drawn. And given the title of my presentation, I have to step out of the box. Sorry, I'll go back now. So there's an ancient Greek aphorism, know thyself. And so I took that seriously. What does it mean to know thyself in the 21st century? Dan is a scientist. What does it mean? Well, I have to know my genetic makeup, right? So I had a swab done to find out a little bit about myself. And I discovered a few things that were quite interesting. You see, I have the genetic marker for wanderlust. I have the genetic marker that's also associated with ADD, although I've never been diagnosed with it. I also had a really in-depth analysis here. We did a 360 evaluation among the leaders, and I found out that I have a fixed trait. The psychologist tells me that I'm incapable of changing this. It's just something I'm born with, and I should just learn to live with. I'm told that I am a lifelong outsider. Regardless of the community in which I find myself, I will feel outside of the box. So what do you do with that? You see, if you have that fixed personality trait and you have the genetic trait of wanderlust, that could lead to some interesting journeys through your life. You could be switching jobs every 6 months or every year. Somehow, God has managed to keep me here for almost 10 years. But I do believe that God has maybe used these traits to help me look at the world a little bit differently, although I think we all do. And so I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about this concept of leading outside of the box. This is also the first presentation I've given years without a PowerPoint, so I put some things down here just in case I started my wanderlust of the mind. So I'm going to explain to you tonight why I am one of Lutheran education's greatest critics. I had to soften that phrase as I sat there. I was going to come up and say, I'm here to tell you why I am not a champion of Lutheran schools. But I want to talk to you why I am a champion of Lutheran education while being Lutheran schooling's greatest critic. You see, a box, the definition of a box is simply a rectangular container with or without a cover or a top, right? So, what is an organizational box? I haven't found a definition, so being one who lives outside the box, I made up one for you tonight. And an organizational box consists of all of those beliefs, values, preferred practices, all of those habits, those rituals, all those things you attach to. An organizational box is your culture. So that seems like a good thing. You know, we all have organizational boxes. And if we all just jumped out of them, our organizations would just wither away. But one thing that I've come to believe very strongly, and I think this is really critical, it came from my study actually of cultures from around the world, missiology, and then a body of literature known as the diffusion of innovation. I've come to believe very strongly that mission and culture, while often intertwined, are very, very different things. And we can run into some terrible problems if we forget that and we make the mistake of believing that our culture is our mission and that our mission is our culture. You see, missions are wild, unboxed, unleashed, compelling whys that drive us to pursue things outside of our existing culture sometimes. They drive us to see needs that are unmet in the world and finding ways to create new boxes to address them. Missions are powerful and they refuse to be held down and contained in a single box. They're just too big, just too powerful, just too moving. Sometimes we try to tame them. Sometimes we try to hide them and stuff them in the boxes, and missions are obviously, they need to be permeating the walls of our boxes, our cultures, our organizations. That's critical to what we do. You've probably heard culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, culture can eat mission for breakfast too if we're not careful. Let me say that again. Culture can eat mission for breakfast if we're not careful. You see, sometimes we get caught up in all of these rituals and these preferred practices, and sometimes we give them the name best practice because then we can champion them. And we hold on to them so tightly that when someone actually comes in, driven and moved by the mission to pursue something outside of the box or the culture, those very people are labeled anti-missional. They're labeled as enemies of the mission. People who are undermining the mission. You've come to take it down. You're trying to change our mission, who we are, what we're about. And yet I'm coming here to say that while that's a reality, sometimes we can do that. Sometimes we can buy into innovation for innovation's sake. I am a huge advocate for what I call missional innovation, mission-minded innovation. It's innovation that's animated by sort of an addiction to the mission. You can't let it go. You find yourself waking up at night pondering what it looks like to live out that mission for a new audience or in a new way. You wake up in the morning and you can't wait to get to work and start building some new boxes. You see, there are people in this room right now, you are wired to be box builders. And you live in one box, but you have a calling to build more. It doesn't necessarily mean that you leave the organization in which you reside right now, but the mission of that organization, I guarantee you, it has new boxes to build, and you can be a part of that. We sometimes cling to this missional fervency in our boxes, in our cultures. But we want to be careful. You see, some reject this notion and they confuse our culture with our mission, and it can lead to some really interesting challenges. In the Lutheran education system, many people here are tied to that Lutheran education system. if we go back and we look at American Lutheran education, we know that a lot of the German Lutheran system, education was primarily in German. We would teach in the German language. And there were some people that had the gall to suggest that maybe, just maybe, we should be teaching in English because it's a really popular language in this new country in which we find ourselves. But see, part of the mission was focused upon serving a population of immigrants who spoke German, churched and unchurched. And it served, and it was an important task at that time. But once some strange kind of seemingly anti-missional people suggest that maybe we should do Lutheran education in English, imagine all of the people that were served. We know, we don't have to imagine it. There's this whole new population of people that was served with Lutheran education. The same thing is true, not just with cultural things like language, but the habits and practices that we come to believe are standard, non-negotiable aspects of school. But they're not. And the more that we're willing to just be open, just to consider the possibilities, the more opportunities we have to do some fun box building. You see, in phenomenology, in philosophy, there's this thing called phenomenology that believes in essence. And the idea is that certain ideas, they have an essence. And there are three questions that you can ask to get to the essence of an idea. The first one that you can ask is, what's essential? So if we're going to ask that of a ball, what is the essential trait of a ball? The second question is, what's important? So these are traits that are important. It impacts its use. But if they change, it can still be a ball. And then the third question is, what's merely present? These are the things that you could change, still a ball. You can still play the same game with it. You see, for a ball, some people will tell you a ball needs to be round. Well, what about a football? Do we just rule the whole game of football out by that definition? Is that an essential attribute of a ball? But if you get into it, to some point, we can eventually conclude that one essential attribute of a ball is it needs to be round on at least one plane. And that works for bowling balls, baseballs, footballs, basketballs. You see, the shape of the ball is not essential, but it's important, and it impacts its usage. What I've found in learning organizations is I've visited them around the world, and I've come to some really amazing, innovative, high-impact organizations that are doing things outside the box. The big difference is that they just made sure to not over-define the essential category. They realized that a lot of the things that they held on to, and maybe like letter grade systems, desks and rows, bells, things like the schedules that we use, sometimes those things are not essential. They're not essential in any of our organizations. They may be really important to the clients that we serve, to the people that we serve at the moment, but they're not essential. And these schools are doing some pretty incredible things with it. So I would argue that leading outside the box starts with asking these three questions. To really ask candidly and deeply, what are the essential attributes of our organization, of our mission? What are the ones that are important, but they're not essential? And what are the ones that are merely present? Doing that can create some incredible possibilities, and I've seen it happen all over the place. You see, leading outside the box, pure and simple, is just having the courage to let go of some of those cultural norms that we thought were essential. 1995, I wrote my master's thesis, 1996-7. I wrote my master's thesis on the promise and possibility of online learning for Lutheran education. I called every university in the system, and I called all sorts of people, and I said, hey, anyone want to help me with this? I think this is an incredible ministry opportunity. And everyone said, you know, I think that's kind of a trend. It's going to pass. And so we tried it. And actually, Don Kortz is somewhere here. We actually started the first pilot online Lutheran high school in the country back in the 1990s. And even to this day, online learning seems so outside the box to some people that they'll say, you can't do real Lutheran education. You can't do real ministry in an online setting. And then last month, in an administrative council meeting, President Ferry read an email that had been shared by a student who took an online theology class with us, and at the end of the class announced to the professor that she was getting baptized, that her son was getting baptized, and that her best friend was getting baptized. So don't tell me that you can't do Lutheran education online. What is essential? What is important? And what is merely present? So why am I one of Lutheran education's greatest critics? It's because I am unswervingly, unquestionably, undeniably one of Lutheran education's missional advocates. Because I believe that the mission is too big and too important to be bound by a single box. We need lots of boxes in education because different boxes will serve different populations. And there are some of us in this room that are craving to help build the next box. We ask that you give us patience, be patient with us. Sometimes we need a little guidance to be brought back into the box, I'll admit that. But join us and maybe even give us a little space to help create that next box. Because when you have an organization that puts mission above the current culture, watch out. Thank you.
I only wish Bernard had more passion. We're coming around the stretch here, the stretch turn, and it's grind. Leadership takes hard work, perseverance, dedication, takes hustle. And there's no one better here tonight to inspire us and talk to us about how leadership is a long-distance journey. Other than our own president, Patrick Ferry, would you welcome him to the stage?
There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks so much to all of you for being here tonight. It's one thing to have a hard act to follow, but 4 acts like this to follow. I mean, you can see the struggle I have with the people I have to work with around here. It's just such a burden. But truly, and thank you for being here and for listening. And I hope that you've found this evening to be meaningful and beneficial. We're grateful for the chance to interact with you, to share with you. And we're grateful for the gift of your time. You know, they were talking about this timeless mission. Time is an incredibly elusive concept, isn't it? When you think about it, I'm an historian, so I think about time, and but as I think about it as it applies to our discussion tonight, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with someone last fall. He was talking about raising children, and he made the observation that the days are sometimes long, but the years go by fast. And if you've had kids, raised kids, you can perhaps relate to that. You know, maybe if you have young kids now or you remember having young kids, there were some pretty long days. But where did they all go? What happened? This kind of blink of an eye. They were so little, and now they're all grown up. I think the same kind of concept for me applies also to a career. There are long days, but the years, they go by so fast. When I first came to Concordia, I imagined, as I went through the interview process to become professor of history, and the interview went very well, and as I was flying out of Mitchell Field and looking back over Lake Michigan and seeing Milwaukee there in the background, I thought it went well. I thought I was probably going to get the job. And I imagined as I flew away that I would come, that I'd accept it, and that I would stay here for 10 years, which seemed to me to be an inordinately long period of time. Over the course of my career up to that time, Tammy and I had moved around quite a bit. And we got married, and we had a year on vicarage, And then we had a year at the seminary, and then we were a couple of years in Colorado where I was an assistant pastor in graduate school. And then we were in Wyoming where I was a campus pastor. So, we're kind of moving around a lot. And so 10 years seemed like a long time. By the way, we also had a baby every place where we lived, and that's why we're still in Milwaukee. As I come to the end of my 25th year here at Concordia, and I'm about to begin my 20th year as president. I first came, I was in my early 30s. I sort of fancied myself kind of an older brother figure to my students. And you know how older brothers are, they kind of like to tweak students. Some former students are here tonight. You kind of like to encourage them to, stick it to the man when they have the opportunity. And then I became the man, and as a father figure, didn't like that idea quite as much. And now I'm a grandfather, right? I'm for 8 months, and it's the greatest gig in the world. But we are in the midst of a time in my career where I'm experiencing this extraordinary thing that I never would have anticipated. And that's the second generation of students. That is to say, the children of those students who were mine, and others are coming along the way, and we'll look forward to that. I don't anticipate that I'll see my students' children's children, but you never know. We'll see how it goes. July 2nd, 1997. I was 20 years after graduating from high school for me, and it was 10 years after completing my seminary education. It was only a year after I had finished my PhD. I was elected, I guess it's the 8th president of Concordia. That's what the brochure says. So it's a day, of course, that I'll never forget. Tammy and I at that point had 5 children. We moved to Milwaukee. We had 1 more. We have 5 children. The oldest was not quite 10 years old yet. The youngest had just turned 3. Tammy was herself in the middle of her doctoral program, and this extraordinary thing occurred. You should know that when it occurred, there was also a concurrent search that was going on at Concordia, Texas, our sister school in Austin, Texas. And just a month before, I had received the call to become the chief academic officer there. And that seemed to us to be certainly what the Lord had in mind. Clearly, we'd spent enough time living in a cold weather place like Milwaukee. No doubt he wanted us to be able to extend our running hobby in a wonderful place like Austin, Texas. And so I had this conference with David Zerson, who former colleague here, who was the president at Concordia Austin at the time. And I told him, Dave, we're eager to come. We're excited and looking forward to it. But I'm a finalist in the presidential search at Concordia, Wisconsin. What should I do? And his response to me, I'll never forget it. He said, that'll be a great experience for you. You should go ahead and go through the process. This can wait a little while. Besides, you're not going to get it anyway. And so what different? I was not in the least bit offended by that remark, because it seemed like a very, very unlikely thing. And so we prepared as a family to move to Texas. We sold our home. We had a whole list of a stack of letters that included our transfer to a congregation in Austin, enrolling our children in school there. All of these things, I put stamps on all those letters. I had to take care of all this ahead of time because I was, as I'll mention in a moment, getting ready for a trip right after the election. And so we were all set to move. We had a stack of letters. All of them had stamps on them. But I also had this one letter to the side here without a stamp on the envelope, because I was frugal, in which I indicated that I would accept the call to be president of Concordia, just in case. July 1st, 1997 was the final interview. And I went into that interview with the Board of Regents with, I felt, nothing to lose, right? We were planning to move. I was excited about it. It was a great opportunity for me. And so I kind of just let it rip. What difference did it make anyway? I told him I realize I'm only 38 years old, and I've never had any real leadership experience at all up to this point. I was the junior member of the history department. There were two of us. But I also indicated that if they wanted a president, if they would like me to be someone who was 48 years old and had 10 years of experience, well, in 10 years, that's exactly what they'd have, right? I told them that I thought they'd like this one, that Martin Luther was younger than I was when he hammered the 95 Thesis on the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg. I mentioned to them that his namesake, Martin Luther King, he was younger than I was when he had a dream and people got behind him. So in other words, it wasn't really about management experience as it was about leadership. And I could just kind of let it rip. Well, that night it rained. It rained and poured, and the next morning, after this second of those 100-year rainstorms that we had that summer, we were in the basement, squeegeeing out the basement, trying to clean up some of the damage. And I was hoping that I would find out the results of the election before I had to leave late that afternoon, because I'd promised to teach in Tallinn, Estonia for 2 weeks. About noon, I got a call from a colleague who said, well, this is the rumor. It's down to so-and-so and so-and-so, but the board can't decide who they want. I wasn't either one of those so-and-sos, by the way. And then a half an hour later, I got the phone call from the chairman of the Board of Regents. Congratulations, you've just been elected Concordia's next president. And I was absolutely stunned. I mean, completely flabbergasted. One of my sons, my middle son, Andrew, jumped for joy and cheered because he wasn't going to move anyway. He was going to stay no matter what. Which then prompted my oldest son to begin crying because Andrew always gets his way. And within an hour, I kissed Tammy goodbye because I was traveling to Europe, told her to find us a house, and put a stamp on that envelope there, try to peel the other ones off so we can use them again. And I left. And that all-night flight was one that I'll never forget. I was wide awake the whole time. The movie on the flight was actually Evita. The story of this young woman who suddenly rose to a position of prominence that no one would have ever. Anyway, I was trying to make too many connections, but I had 2 weeks in Tallinn, Estonia, to just kind of process what just happened. And what am I going to do now? Really, that processing lasted for a couple of years. The first couple of years were very difficult ones for me, and Tammy and I talked about this often. We wondered early on, do you think people would be mad at us if we quit after 2 years? And then it was, do you think maybe we can last for 5 years? We were finding our way. And now in these latter days, whatever that means, another year, another decade, we're still finding our way to the finish line. And as I'll point out in a bit, which is not really the end, not at all. The topic that I'm sure Gretchen assigned me was leadership for the long run, right? So I'm wearing my props tonight. The long run. Running is something that I do. I figured it out a year ago right now. I was in Boston getting ready for the Boston Marathon. And I'm now training for my 20th marathon later this year. But my more recent claim to running fame is that earlier today, marked the 1,206th day in a row that I've run at least a mile. Right? It's an average of a little over 4 miles, so about 5,200 miles over the course of that time. And some people think, wow, that's really impressive. And I like to point out, it's really more like flossing, actually. It's just something you have to do before you go to bed at night. But it brings with it the opportunity for metaphor. And I think running allows for that in some meaningful ways as it applies to leadership. And the most obvious one is that we're in it for the long haul. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And as I've run along the way, and as I've thought about maybe some of the metaphors that can be applicable to you, and as you think about leadership in your own context, and you want to apply what might be useful, there are just a couple of points that I would share with you, and I'm fond of alliteration, so I'll give you 6 P's quickly, and then we'll move on to something else. The first one of these, though, is purpose. Purpose. For me, when I run, I don't like to just run for no reason. I mean, for me, I don't run aimlessly. There's always a goal. There's always something in mind. There's something that I want to achieve. And every individual run has some purpose that's attached to it as well as a part of the overall training. So I think that's useful. What's our purpose? And we'll talk more about mission in just a little bit. There also has to be passion. You know, passion is not always something that people connect to running. I don't know why that's true. Well, I do, because it's not that fun. In fact, I don't like it very much myself, to tell you the truth. But when we're children, you know, running was a part of our play, wasn't it? I mean, it was really a part of our play. And little ones don't have to be taught about the passion of play. They just run. They play. And they're somewhere along the line, I don't know, organized sports is to blame for this, but running became punishment rather than play. But find your play. Be passionate about what you're doing. Your heart has to be in it. And you need to persist. There are no shortcuts to success. I think that our human inclination is the path of least resistance, isn't it? I mean, where can we take a shortcut in order to get to where we want to go? There is no shortcut to success. Every day, every day, every day. That leads to the idea of perseverance. There are peaks and there are valleys, probably more valleys than there are peaks. There are hard stretches, difficult days. Take them one step at a time. Pathos. We're in this thing together, and it's important for us as we journey to help each other. In a marathon, that's one of the best parts of the whole deal. The people on the side who are cheering for you, but especially those who are running alongside you and that you're running alongside. You can support each other, help each other along the way. And then finally, and perhaps for me, maybe the one insight that I can appreciate the most that connects this metaphorically is patience. We don't live in a delayed gratification culture. But so many of the goals and objectives that we seek are not ones that are going to come instantly or automatically. Patience for the long run. There are also a few things that I think are useful in terms of running that maybe are not so metaphorical. I'll just mention them briefly. The idea of a healthy mind and a healthy body, that's a real thing. And it's something that connects to our mission here when we talk about helping students develop in mind and body and spirit for service. But it goes back much farther than that. I mean, the ancient Greeks had this idea of a healthy mind and a healthy body as something very important for citizens as a part of the learning endeavor. For me, too, it's just diversion. And C.S. Lewis once made the observation about reading. He said, you ought to treat reading as if it were a vice. Isn't that cool? I mean, treat reading as if it were a vice. For me, I sort of treat running that way, like it's a vice. You know, it's like every day I kind of get away with it, when otherwise I might not. A few insights about long-haul leadership that I've gathered along the way, and I'll divide this into 2 parts. Part 1, the fairly obvious, things that won't surprise you at all, and then maybe a few little nuggets that you can take with you that I think might also be useful that maybe would not have occurred to you. Others have said it better than I'll say it tonight. I'll just mention it briefly. A great mission is a great driver. right? I mean, there's rarely a conversation in which I'm out in front of people and talking about Concordia that I don't talk about our mission. I mean, it's what motivates us here. Every one of my colleagues has addressed it. And each one of you is a part of a great mission too. A great mission is a great driver. A great team is indispensable. It doesn't mean that everybody has to have the same skill set. In fact, it works a lot better when people don't. I appreciate about my leadership team the fact that they're very different people, and often with very different ideas, and in fact, conflicting perspectives from time to time. I think that's beneficial for all of us as long as we can pull it all together in the interests of the greater cause. It's important, I think, also that there's a willingness to embrace challenge and opportunities that keep it fresh. For us, we've had a few of those along the way, whether it was the lakeshore restoration that I talked to you about earlier today, or the new pharmacy program. You had a chance to be in our pharmacy building, or more recently, the merger with Concordia Ann Arbor. Big challenges, lofty goals that we've worked together to try and achieve great things. I also found that it's been useful for me to have kind of a counter or a contrarian approach to a default that I was once instructed every administrator ought to know. When I first became president, first day in the office, Mike Stelmakowitz, his granddaughter's here, he was our interim president. He asked me this question, and it was interesting for me because Mike Stelmakowitz had been the president at St. John's College when I was first a student there. Now I'm sharing an office with him for a month or two. He said to me, do you know the one word that every administrator needs to know in order to be successful? I said, no. He said, that's right. I would suggest my own career has been just the opposite of that, though, and that my default is typically yes. And by that I mean, when people come to me with ideas, if they think it's worth bringing to my attention, they must feel pretty strongly about it. And so my impulse is to say, let's think about this. How can we make this work, even if sometimes it's clear that it's not going to work? Anyway, not everything's going to work well. And from Luther, I've learned to pray against my will, to pray against my own will. There are things I'd like to accomplish, but when I pray to the Lord, I say, Lord, if this is not what you want, cause it to crash and burn and to fail. Even though it might embarrass me or make me look a little silly, if this isn't what you want, then ultimately it's not what I want either. To pray against our own will. And this was raised earlier, humility is also very important. To give credit where it's due. Concordia's had a great run. I often get credit for that, and my colleagues are amused at that idea, because they know where the real work occurs, and I do too. But ultimately, for all of us, it's to give thanks to God, who is the one who gives us, as we celebrated a few years ago, one blessing after another. A few other insights briefly about things that maybe are not so obvious. I get a lot of credit for things that I don't deserve, but I also get blamed sometimes for things that I didn't do either. And that's difficult, but I had to learn this early on, and I'm sure that you find it useful too. We can't take every problem personally. And we're not the source and the cause of every problem, but if we take every problem personally, then it's going to limit our effect to be part of the solution. So think about being a part of the solution rather than being offended every time somebody blames you for something you might not deserve. It's also important for me, and it's become more and more difficult because I've been at this so long, to maintain a sense of identity apart from my job. Most of you know me, think of me as president of Concordia, I realize that. But when I think about myself, I think about it this way. This is what I do. This is not who I am. And who I am will continue to be true long after I no longer do what I do. Prioritization. One more brief look at that 1997 interview. Our same president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, Al Berry, posed this question to me. He said, when you're at the end of your career, 20 years from now, do you hope people will look back on and say was your legacy? And I didn't have to think for more than a second about what my response would be to that. It was this. When all is said and done, I want my children to be able to say that I was a good dad. And that my wife thought I was a good husband too, of course. But to me, that's the most important. That if Concordia ever somehow got in the way of that relationship, it caused conflict between my children and I, or that they just somehow didn't love Concordia because it intruded upon our relationship, then I fear my priorities would have been out of place. Finally, as we reach the finish line for this evening, I recognize that this is a great place. It's been a privilege beyond all deserving to be a part of it, its mission. And it's a mission that's going to go on long after me. So I have a responsibility, I think perhaps my most important responsibility, is to prepare the next generation for leadership. To make sure that it continues to thrive and to flourish and to go well beyond anything that we might have been able to achieve. And finally, to keep in mind, as a leader, that this isn't about me. It's not about me at all. Because when I finish, it's not the end. Not for me or for Concordia. So I keep working to try and make sure that we both are and remain healthy and whole. And I hope that that's also going to be true for you as you lead. That you remain healthy and whole, and that you keep on running. God bless you. Thank you very much.